Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in again to your weekly dose of Christian worldview applied to our current contemporary culture. And we're so grateful again for you, and thank you for watching in. This season that we're living in, it's hard for me to frame the importance of it. We just saw something that in our lifetime, I'm a bit older than you, but since 1973, I was around in 1973 with the infamous Roe v. Wade ruling coming down. We're coming to an opportunity, a historic opportunity, especially as Hoosiers, to really define the abortion and life as we move forward, and really begin creating Indiana as a beacon, as a state that promotes life and liberty throughout the nation. The special session that has been called in Indiana to deal with this was moved from earlier this month to now I believe Monday the 26th will be the opening of the special session to address the abortion issue in Indiana. And again, sometimes when you're living in the midst of history, it's hard to realize the incredible moment in which we have to make history. And how important that is. Many folks were not around or had no input in the Roe v. Wade decision back in 1973, but we do have a say in what happens here in 2022 as it relates to how we move forward. And so I got a couple bits of information I just want to share with you as we're getting information. We'll be talking more about this on Sunday. But the first one being, there's a Stand for Life rally on Monday, July 25th at the State House, beginning at noon and going to about 2:30. That is a Stand for Life rally, Indiana State House on Monday the 25th. And then on Tuesday, the Indiana Right to Life is hosting what they're calling Love Them Both rally. And you can go to the website lovethemboth.com to register for this event. It begins at 11 o'clock. That's a Tuesday, July 26th rally. So 2 different events. And the reason why we're promoting this is because it's so critically important from what we're hearing, that those of us who love life and who value life are there in body to stand and to promote and to support our legislators and to encourage them to do what's right. We know the opposition is going to be there. They're going to be loud. They're going to be vocal. They're going to be angry. They're going to be. I've already seen videos. We know what that crowd is like. They're going to be present, and it's just so important that we're there to let our elected officials know that we are the majority in this state, and we want to see a culture of life, recreated. So. And that's, even as I say this is not normal for most of us. We're trying to raise our kids, work our jobs, do all the things that we do just in normal life. We're not activists by nature. We're not people that show up and, protest or whatever. That's just kind of not who we are by nature. But it is who we need to be. Again, not protesters, but we need to stand for life. We need to be there. We need to open our mouths. We need to declare the truth. We need to be salt and light. And that's just something that I think many Christians are a little bit, awkward with doing. But we gotta move beyond our awkwardness. We have to show up.
Yeah, we don't have the luxury of the pay agitators to come to rallies and so forth.
Absolutely.
So we have to actually do it because we have convictions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about the rule of law and restoring the rule of law. And as we preached from God's word, restoring a biblical theology of life that begins with the truth that all life is sacred. So as we're looking to promote righteousness in law, especially as it relates to abortion, we need to start from the cornerstone principle that God created life. We talked about this in our last podcast, that life is made in the image and likeness of God, which gives it incredible value, and that every single life, no matter what extenuating circumstances, every single life is valuable and should be honored and should be celebrated and should be given a chance to live. Abortion is not health care. I saw a great meme that said, if abortion is health care, then slavery is job creation. And of course, that's, it drives the point home. Slavery is not job creation. It's a terrible injustice, and abortion is not health care. It is actually the destruction of human life. And so we need to be promoting these truths and declaring these truths over and over and over again, even as the pro-choice side, pro-death side has been promoting lies over and over again for now almost 50 years. So really want to encourage everybody to show up. Also, I wanted to, this is a brand new book that Ryan Anderson and Alexandra DeSanctis are coming out with called Tearing Us Apart. Encourage everybody to pick up a copy of that book. And in the book, they say Roe removed nearly every question about abortion policy from the hands of the American people and placed the issue into the hands of unelected judges, even though the Constitution contains nothing that could remotely support a right to abortion. And so you hear a lot of people now talking about, the courts stripped us of our rights. That's not true, as we know. There has been no stripping of rights. What's happened is we're finally getting back to the way our nation was conceived, and that's allowing local people, local legislatures to weigh in on the abortion issue.
Yeah.
And not an unelected body of judges who basically what we've seen over the last 50 years is the left realizes that they cannot push their agenda forward in a normal electoral process. In other words, they're not going to get votes to push their agenda. So they, ever since Roe, they have largely looked to the courts to shove their agenda down the throats of the American people. And if they can just elect enough liberal, or place enough liberal judges on the courts, then they can push their agenda, even though the American people find it offensive. Well, this is not going to be the case anymore because now this is going back to the people, which is the way it should be.
Yeah, and people talk about these conservative justices. Now, I don't like those terms.
No.
Democrat, Republican justice.
It politicizes the court.
Absolutely. What you're looking for is judges who are doing their job, which is, we even have a term originalist, because I don't know what other terms should they be. You interpret the law based on the Constitution, and the Constitution is, probably the greatest hindrance to all these different things that the woke radical left is trying to push.
Right.
So I remember I listened to a podcast. They talk about how, I guess, Justice Alito's, in his opinion on this case, they went through two tests. These are tests that judges should go through. First of all, is this right enshrined in the Constitution, such as right to bear arms or right for free speech? Is not.
Yeah.
The second test they do is, would the founders, or when they enshrine those things, would they have understood this particular issue in context of what's going on based on their time?
Right.
And they look back then and it's like, no, that's not the case.
Yeah. In other words, and there was nobody supporting of abortion back at the framing of our Constitution. I mean, that would have been shocking for anybody.
Or I think they used like the whatever amendment, the privacy, whatever amendment,
Right.
and when they passed that amendment, that wasn't the discussing the issue.
Right.
So again, to me, those clear rules are great ways for not just for us, for everybody, because it provides framework and constraints on the justices, so they're not just like, I feel like it or it seems right to me. You have to be based. The Supreme Court, all the justices should be under a constraint of law. Right?
Exactly.
And so people might not like the decision, but they got to understand this is good for the nation because there's a constraint. I don't like it when conservative judges make stuff out of their own either. No. Be under the constraint of the law. We're all accountable to something.
Well, this was interesting because even the judges who would not be strict originalists, all right, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for instance, who was strongly in support of abortion. She called the right to choose in legal terms, she said Roe was a heavy-handed judicial intervention. In other words, the court stepped in with a heavy hand and intervened and just made a decision that was, as she said, when you use heavy-handed, that means that the court took a lot of liberty. We would call it activism.
Yeah, she's the icon for all those different things. Yeah, so again, like, she understood that legally that was a stretch.
Yeah. And that's been the whole point. Regardless of where you stand on the abortion issue, the justices admit that was a stretch. It was creating rights that were not in the Constitution out of thin air to make a decision on an issue, and then very much politicize the issue, because these issues again were meant to be decided locally at the most local level, hearing the voices of the people. And that it's not happened. Now we see a situation where almost every case is politicized and every case is an act of judicial activism.
Yeah, and what it does is cause more division in the country. Just to decide it in court does not settle the case in any ways.
In the hearts of the people.
Yeah, in the case, it's just got more volatile and more divisive in America today.
Yep, exactly. So let's get involved. That's the bottom line. Get involved, please. We're gonna be providing phone numbers to call your elected officials. Encourage them. If you can't get down there, please call. Weigh in on the issue. Your voice really does matter, and it's for such a time as this. And just think of, again, the lives that are at stake in America. I was just told by one of our elected officials that because other states already have trigger laws in effect surrounding us, outlawing abortion, that there's been a huge influx of people coming from other states to Indiana because we have not ruled on the issue to receive abortions, which is a tragedy. You know, so here Indiana now is becoming through Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. We're actually facilitating abortions from states around us who have, drawn a line. So we really do need to act. We need to act quickly, and human life is at stake. And so get involved. So let's get back, and we're going to continue our discussion on a strange new world that we have been introducing. Like, how in the world do we get to where we are today? Especially in the area of sexual ethics. And we began this discussion a few weeks ago by simply bringing up an illustration. I would say hypothetical, but it's not really hypothetical. It's very practical, of the phrase, I am a woman trapped in a man's body. Now, if you were a physician and I came to you back in, say, the 1950s, and I said, Dr. Andrew, I am a woman trapped in a man's body, what would be your treatment plan?
I wasn't exactly sure, but to me, that it would be seen as a mental illness.
Right.
If I took it seriously, if I didn't think you were joking around with me, I would say, hey, we probably need to go see us.
So my mind is telling me something that does not correspond with my physical reality,
right?
And therefore, you have to either make two choices. Either I bring my mind in alignment with my inner feelings or my psychological self in alignment with my body, or I have to change my body and try to bring it in alignment with my psychological reality. So in other words, there's only two options there. You, back in the 1950s, would have landed on the option that the mind needs to be brought in alignment with the body. The body is the determiner. Your biological reality is what determines who you are.
Yep.
But nowadays, just the opposite is happening. And I go to Dr. Andrew, and he would say, well, here's your options. Basically, transgender therapies to bring your body in line with what you're feeling about yourself. And then we're asking the question, how do we get there? What gave the inner psychological realm of feelings the authority, the definitive authority to determine the course of action?
By the way, I mean, these types of issue happens in other realm, and we have clarity in other realm. I read an article discussing this type of issue with like anorexia, for example. Because
great point.
I don't understand that very deeply. I'm looking into it, but the article basically says, anorexia, you feel like you are obese even though you're not. So you keep fasting, even though. So there's a disconnect between your physical reality, what everyone else sees is what your doctor might see, and what your mind perceives, which is how you look to yourself.
So this is a great example. So everybody around you is going, honey, you need to eat. You're literally starving yourself to death.
Yeah.
But the person, if we're celebrating their authenticity and their inner self and their inner feelings, they're saying, no, I'm fat and I'm overweight. And we're like, no, your bones are sticking out.
As far as I know, people, maybe things have changed now, but as far as I know, people still in the medical world, they see that and they treat you to deal with your mental illness, to try to align your mind with what.
Because if they don't, you're going to destroy yourself. And it's interesting that we could make the same argument.
Sure.
For the transgenderism.
So the authentic self has a slippery slope if you talk about other issues.
Right.
And so anyways, yeah.
So it's only used in the realm of sexuality, basically.
I'm nervous you'll move to other areas too, so I don't know. Ask me in a few years.
But it's interesting, like we say, because this is the problem. This worldview is very highly selective in its application. And when you try to apply it to other situations that are the same, it kind of it blows up, it falls apart.
Yeah.
At least at this point it does.
Right.
So, we're also making a statement that this decision today to now begin to basically mutilate one's body to try to conform it to a gender that it was not created as is not a scientific decision. In other words, the science can talk about the body and science can explore the mind, but science cannot talk about authority, philosophical authority, why one has authority over the other. Those are philosophical or theological discussions. It's not scientific discussions. But now, so even all the debate today cannot be put under the banner of, well, this is what science is showing. This is not what science is showing. In fact, it's really kind of anti-science. And yet that's the direction, that we're moving. But let's talk a little bit about this. The Bible deals with recognize the awareness of our inner selves and our feelings. Mm-hmm. We got David in the Psalms, which I love the Psalms. David many times is saying, talking to himself, why are you downcast, O my soul? He's recognizing the reality of his depression or his anxiety or his fear. Over and over again, we see this in the Bible. The Apostle Paul is struggling with the fact that inside he's got lust, he's got desires that are not godly, and he's aware of those desires, and he's wrestling with those desires. Yeah. St. Augustine wrote his treatise called Confessions, where he revealed the inner workings of his heart and some of the dark things he was struggling with, and just wrestling with flesh and sin and all of those things. And so the Bible recognizes that. How would you say the Bible, though, our understanding of the Bible is different than the current understanding of inner feelings and self?
Yeah, I think you and I talked about this before. We're not anti-emotions, nor are we anti-introspection. We're not just saying, like, doesn't matter what you care, how you feel, just do it, suck it up in all arenas. And we have gone through series talking about the importance of dealing with shame and dealing with emotions.
Getting your heart healed.
Getting your heart healed. Emotions are important. Emotions are we call it the dashboard of what's going on in our body.
Right.
But there's a big difference between paying attention to our emotions, caring for our emotions, getting healthy emotions, versus allowing our emotions and our deep areas of introspection to become our compass.
Our authority.
Authority.
So you and I, when we analyze what's going on the inside, we do it through an external grid, recognizing there is a God, we're created by God, our emotions are part of us, but our emotions are not the whole story. And that from a Christian perspective, recognizing that our emotions are very fickle and they're actually a very lousy guide to reality, although we don't deny that they're real. But I guess we recognize there's an external reality greater than our internal feelings.
Yeah, we recognize. I mean, how many times, like, at night, you're super tired and you're just like, everything's wrong, and like everything gets on your nerve. Your wife gets on your kids on your nerve, and your wife is like, you should probably go take a nap. Or just go to bed.
Right.
You wake up next morning, you're just like, wow, I feel so much better. Or how about this? You're starving and everything annoys you, and someone throws you a Snicker bar, or you eat a meal, and all of a sudden you're like, those are the moments that tells me, like, wow, my emotions are fickle.
Yeah.
And so even as we do perform introspection, as we process emotion, a lot of times I process emotion with someone else, because here's the big issue. We recognize, because we're limited humans, we have mega blind spots.
Yeah.
And when it's your blind spot, it's your blind spot. You cannot overcome your blind spot, or it wouldn't be your blind spot. That's why I need other people, external forces, external context, like the Bible, like my friends, my wife, to come and say, hey, I know you feel this way, but you're a little bit out of context right now. Right. So
you slightly overreacted.
Yes.
Or why don't you pause a minute before you act on those internal impulses, because they might not lead you to a good place.
Or take a nap.
Yeah.
Or eat something and then talk to me.
Which tells you that your physical condition can influence your body.
Yeah.
Can influence your emotions. It all works together. But it's interesting. We're going to look at a couple major historical figures today, thought leaders, that laid some of the seedbed of how we got into the crazy world in which we're living today, where whatever I feel is real and you have to validate and celebrate it, and et cetera, et cetera. And one of those major thinkers is a philosopher called Rene Descartes. He's actually the father of rationalism. And he was living in a time where the church was largely corrupt and governments were corrupt, and it was leading up to the Enlightenment period, and where he began to just radically question the basis of knowledge. Epistemology is the philosophical study of how you know something to be true. How do you know what you know?
Yeah.
And so we can talk about our senses, we can talk about our minds, we can talk about revelation. Of course, Descartes was a Christian man, as were all these early philosophers. They were not anti-God in any way, but he was just really questioning what is true and where can I find solid ground to base my beliefs in reality. And these are good questions that philosophers used to wrestle with.
How do I know what I know is true?
Yeah, how do I know what I know is true? And if I'm questioning everything, so he was a mathematician, and the reason many of these folks loved mathematics is because 2 + 2 = 4 all the time. I mean, they found certain truths that were true, true to the mind. There's no other way they could not be true. In other words, they were theorems, they were foundational truths, and mathematics had that kind of certainty. So they were looking for certainty, like mathematical certainty, for the rest of life. And so Descartes questioning everything. Radical skepticism about everything. And finally, he came to the fact that, wait a minute, somebody is doing the questioning. Somebody is skeptical. Somebody's asking all the questions about what is true, and that somebody is me. And he came up, of course, with that famous maxim, I think, therefore I am. So somebody was doing the thinking, and the person doing the thinking must be real, and therefore that was for him, rational thought was the foundation of certainty.
Yeah.
But again, so how does that differ? Because Christians certainly believe in rational thought. But what's the problem with rational thought and the person doing the thinking from a Christian standpoint?
Well, we're still limited. Again, the Christian thought by itself says we are limited beings, So there's a whole degree of revelation that goes beyond
it's necessary.
rational. Yeah.
So if human beings are fallen, then that believes our emotional realm has been tainted by sin. It also believes that our thought processes have been tainted by sin. So rationality is not pure in and of itself, because I'm still the one exercising the thought process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, how many people have we seen, scientists or whoever, rationalize some way and they're like, oh, it's perfect, and someone else look at it, you're like, no, you insert so much bias into that calculus.
And that's the problem, is that, as you talked about, the blind spot because of sin. The Bible says there's a way that seems right unto man, but the end thereof it leads to destruction. So we're so blinded, and our thinking processes are so limited. And we have to ask this question, just to get philosophical here. Why do you trust your rationality? If your rationality is somehow cut off from God and you're the locus of knowledge and authority, why do you trust your brain and the processes of your brain to lead you to a good conclusion? So revelation, the fact that there is a God, that God has spoken, that God speaks into our culture, that God defines who we are, that God has told us that we're fallen, sinful people, and that our heart is deceptive, and that which leads us to being deceptive in our thoughts. I mean, all of these truths are critical if we're to understand our emotions and our minds properly.
Yeah. And we're not being anti-rationalism. We're just saying there's a level beyond rationalism, because human beings are imperfect by nature.
Right.
And again, we need a bigger constraint. We need accountability even in our rationalism. And Descartes was a believer in God. He still reasoned back to God. He wasn't, and he...
But the reason his thought is important is because it moved the locus of authority, of certainty, of truth from the outside world, the God created world of revelation, to the internal world of human thought. And that's the seed that leads us along the journey of where we got to today.
I thought it was interesting because he was being reactionary to current culture, which was a lot of corruption, a lot of institutions that he's believed in, he's relied on, he's taken for granted, is falling apart right before his eyes. So even his journey began because of corruption, because people aren't doing what they're supposed to do.
It was a reaction. It was a reaction to sin.
Yeah, reaction to sin. So I mean, just the cascade of sin. Yes,
the pendulum swinging.
Yeah.
And so Descartes puts the fundamental importance on our minds, and then he begins to open the door to this possibility that there could be a disagreement between mind and body. And that's really the essential role that he plays. But then we get to the second major thinker, and he's probably had the greatest influence upon where we are today. and that is Rousseau,
Most
Jean-Jacques
people don't
Rousseau.
even know his name.
Yeah, but
they react to his philosophy. They live according to his philosophy.
Yeah, we are little Rousseauians in our culture today, because Rousseau is the epitome of the expressive individualist. He was a very unique, strange man, eccentric man, but very seminal thinker, much of a genius in many ways, self-taught, a genius in many ways, but a morally depraved person as well. You know, he has been given credit as being the father of the French Revolution, and also being the father of a period of literature and art that's called Romanticism. So if you go back and you read the Romantic poets, or the period of Romanticism and the literature and the art that was created during that time, much of it goes back to the thinking and the ideas in Rousseau. But interestingly enough, for instance, Rousseau had 5 children. He didn't raise any of them. I don't believe that some of them he fathered illegitimately. All of them were sent to state-run orphanages. And in those days, if you went to a state-run orphanage as a child, you were not going to survive. I mean, they were horrific places of abuse and neglect. So his most basic responsibility as a father, he placed onto the state. And that's where, again, you see this thinking today that the state's job is to raise us, to take care of us, you know, from the cradle to the grave.
Well, at least it's consistent with his worldview.
Yeah, very consistent with his worldview. But we don't like that part of his worldview is not really dealt with.
Yeah.
But here's why Rousseau is important. He locates the identity of the inner psychology of the individual, the inner feelings of the individual, as central, as the ground of authority, as the place, the locus of control. All right, the most important thing. He wrote his own version of Confessions, that like Augustine before him, but it was radically different. He was basically saying, I'm going to give you an account of everything that's going on the inside of Rousseau.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you everything I think and what I feel and what's going on. It was almost like a free flow of consciousness. Some people call it the first autobiography. But basically, the reason it was so radical is because of the authority that was given to what he was feeling. Most people would say, you know, I'm feeling lust when I look at that woman, but I'm not going to say that because I know that lust is wrong. I'm not going to verbalize my feelings because I realize that there's a virtue in lust is not good.
Nor should I act on it.
Right. Absolutely.
Something I struggle against.
Right. I'm going to make my struggle internal because there's no glory in sharing the wicked feelings or desires of my heart. Yeah. But for Rousseau, that was being inauthentic. And so we have this whole culture of authenticity today, right? But it really comes from Rousseau, who said, no, we should act upon the impulses of our inner feelings because they're actually good.
So, I mean, that's very revolutionary for back then.
Radically revolutionary.
Radically, you know, for now, it's just like, okay, whatever. But back then, I mean, when social norms is kind of the king, and he was a rebel.
And we're talking about, you know, a culture that was very much into, you know, pomp and circumstance and dress and the right, you know, class structure,
face and how you look,
saving face and powdered wigs and all of that.
Yeah.
And he just went against every convention. I mean, he was a radical. He was a radical revolutionary thinker.
Yeah.
He was totally living cross culturally. And made a show everywhere he went because he just went against every social convention possible. So, for instance, we talked about, in the book they talk about Richard Nixon. When the public was aware of the Nixon transcripts of the tapes, right? It said, you know, as Nixon was talking, it would say in parentheses expletive. They didn't type out the expletive because it was a curse word, so they just said expletive, deleted. And when the American public saw, my gosh, we have a president using foul language. You know, how unbecoming is that? In other words, if this guy in his private life uses vulgarity, why should we trust him in his public life? Now, this has completely been turned on in because modern presidents find it fashionable to use profanity at their rallies. And so, you know, nowadays, it's a sign that you're being authentic.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, it would have been an indication of a lack of character.
Right. And this is to me kind of reactionary, because we're reactionary to how many people who've been fake, who says one thing then does another.
Right.
So we'll settle with someone who just says what they think.
Someone who's authentic. Perverted or crude.
We'll take that over someone who's going to cheat on us, you know, and because we're reactionary to. How about someone who says what they're going to do and actually do it?
Right.
You know,
that kind of authenticity is good.
So, but it's just interesting where our we drift. We were reactionary to whatever we last. I mean, again, I think being reactionary is again, it's not great, because you're reacting to something else. That's why, again, the blind spot is a human being has infinite capacity for blind spot, because even when you try to do the most good, sometimes you're being reactionary, you don't even know it. You know, you're swimming, so you're pushing that pendulum to one extreme.
Right.
You don't even know it.
But see, even the blind spot suggests that there are areas of our life which we're not aware of, but that are harmful.
Yeah.
Rousseau probably would not agree with the whole notion of a blind spot, because there are no blind spots to the individual who's simply expressing their real self.
Yeah.
Because your real self becomes the gold standard.
Right.
And so we see here a radical shift in Christian thinking by Rousseau, because he basically rejects the whole idea of natural depravity. Human beings are not born evil. Mm-hmm. Human beings are born good, and then they're corrupted by evil institutions.
Yeah.
It's the family that's evil. Now, it's interesting, we pointed out, Rousseau did not believe that the state was evil. He actually believed that the state's job was to force men to become free, which is a paradox. It's the introduction of government enforced tyranny for your own good. We're going to, we're going to, the state's going to be the liberator. The family and the church were institutions that he hated, largely because of the morality that they promoted. Morality was viewed as the external conformity that forced me to become something that I'm not. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, Rousseau's most famous phrase, and maybe some of you have heard this, is this: man is born free, and yet everywhere he is in chains. His idea was the idea of the noble savage, that if human beings were just left in their own, like their Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden, pristine created realm, that they would, that the noble savage would lead a wonderful, authentic, beautiful life. Of course, we know that that's not true, because the noble savage is not noble. He's just a savage. Yeah. We are fallen. Our hearts are deceitfully wicked. We're conceived in sin. I mean, the Bible's clear about the problem of human nature. We have good, but we're also fallen, and so we have evil resident within the human heart. But Rousseau rejected all of that. He said the problems were external. The problems were the environment. If people society, all the evil institutions,
family,
and of course, Rousseau's ideas led to the French Revolution, which was a bloodbath. In fact, I want to quote here from Chuck Colson's book, How Now Shall We Live? He said, Robespierre, who led the reign of terror that overtook the French Revolution in 1793, grasped Rousseau's logic all too well. He and his fellow Jacobins understood Rousseau's call for force to include condemnation and execution of all who opposed the new order, resulting in the imprisonment of 300,000 nobles, priests, and political dissidents, and the deaths of 17,000 citizens within a year. So Rousseau's ideas were taken by his contemporaries to lead into a revolution that was by government force that led to the slaughter of thousands and thousands of people. And these folks hated government, at least the old government, and they hated religion. This, very much of what's happening in America today is the spirit of the French Revolution. Yeah. It is unbridled self-expression. It is the hatred of any kind of morality, any institutions that put any limitations on self-expression, the family and the church and the conservative state that's ruled on the basis of law. And we see this big push today. It's really a Rousseauian push for how government should function, and this whole notion of burn it all down, where we see destroy the system. and use violence if necessary. It's very much Rousseauian.
And you and I just had this discussion, this process of using the arms of the government to liberate people so that people can be their authentic self simply doesn't work. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand it. I mean, you see it in our world today. You use the strong arms of tech companies or corporate America or the political culture, whatever, to destroy this institution. And what you do is you erect another institution that simply takes its place. And this institution is forbidding free speech and cancel culture, which is no longer allowing free expressions of people who oppose your views.
Yeah. It's like a universal acid, to use the term again, and one of the things the authors brought out in their book, I talked about this Rousseauian concept does not produce a common shared life experience. It's a lousy foundation for government, because if I'm trying to be authentic and you're trying to be authentic and be true to you, then you and I are automatically adversarial from the start, because you're a threat to my authenticity.
Yep.
And I'm a threat to your authenticity. Now that's just two of us.
Right.
Imagine what happens when we have a world.
Right. I mean, you destroy all the dissenting voices. Are you never going to have dissenting voices again? You're always going to have dissenting voices in this world.
And why is it that our authenticity is never embraced?
Well, because we don't have as big a microphone. We don't have the money. We don't have the political influence.
So it's not all authenticity is celebrated.
Yeah.
It's just authenticity that lines up with your view of reality, your view of society.
So to those who really truly buy into it, and there's people who just use this philosophy as a vessel to promote what they want. It's really about power. Right. I think there are some who truly, more naively believe in these authentic views. You got to be able to, in our culture today, see cancel culture has canceled all kind of authenticity. It's saying, hey, you can't say this. You can't say this. That's hate. That's blah, blah, blah. Just because you're throwing some label on it doesn't mean that that's not authentic to who they are. Are you committed to authenticity, or are you committed to power? And that's the question I want to ask. And that's what annoys me, because you can see this logic. You have one regime that comes to liberate the people. The regime becomes twice as bad as the previous regime.
I like that. Are you committed to authenticity, or is it really just a screen?
If you truly are committed to authenticity, you realize this process does not actually release authenticity. Authenticity in itself has limitations because of what you just said.
Right. And if two authentic people have authentically different ideas about how they want to express themselves that are in conflict, how do you solve or resolve that issue? This is where there has to be a meta-narrative. There has to be a larger story. Yeah. There has to be an outside source of truth that actually speaks into our context. And the Bible provides all of this. We live in a God-created world. God created human beings. God has spoken in the Word. He's communicated to us how we should live. And He's given us a basis for the common good. He's given us an external source of reality that helps us interpret what's going on the inside. At the same time, validating what's going on the inside, but also providing some boundaries for that expression. And if you throw God out, we all become little gods, all in search of power and pleasure and all these other things that compete for expression in the world, and the world becomes a very ugly, bloody place. Whereas you've said many times on this podcast that the end goal becomes just raw power, and we're gonna talk about that in our next session, because we're gonna look at a couple of thinkers who have really laid the foundation for what that looks like when we reject God, and the bloodshed and the power and the values that emerge in that void are really ugly and scary. Yeah. So anyway, we hope this has been helpful to you, and we hope it's a good biblical analysis and treatment of what's really going on and how we got to the crazy world that we're living in today, and provide a tool for what we need to do to rebuild a culture that is centered in Christ, centered in the Word of God, and that promotes true life. So anyway, have a great week. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this to be helpful, please share it with other people, and don't forget to let your voice be heard. Be salt and light as it relates to the whole issue of abortion in Indiana, and the part that we play in creating a culture of life. So until next week, have a great week.